Today's interview is with an inarguable titan of second-generation Magic artists.
Not only is his art brilliant, but he, I think, is one of the key players in creating an art market that actually incentivizes the use of traditional over digital painting that is, how do you say,
Booming!
His name?
Chris Rahn.
His interview?
It's coming at the end of the next sentence. Enjoy.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, for sure. It's no biggie. I'm literally in the middle of a painting, so I'm like,
all right,
take a break, talk, no big deal. This
is
like
it
a paint shirt, you know?
Is it a magic painting?
Yeah, almost always.
Now, speaking of, like, right off the bat, I kind of was curious, I wanted to ask, a year ago in 2021, somebody asked you what your favorite Magic the Gathering piece was, and you said that you could not answer that because it was not released yet. Has that been released yet?
Now I'm wondering which one it was. It really varies set to set. I mean, I don't think I have a favorite, to be completely honest, but like I tend to think of them in years. Like this year, like the dragon that I did for Kamigawa, that was up there for me personally. But also, like, my feelings about individual paintings vary day to day. So
They fluctuate.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. What the heck? It may have been the Tiamat painting that came out with the D&D set. Now that I think about it, I'm just trying to run through because there's just so many paintings in my head at this point. Like, what was in the last year? What's come out?
And
there's a bunch more, but there's also, it may have been one of the artist series ones that hasn't been released yet. They've announced that I will have an artist series this year.
Yes. It's hard to pick a favorite, right? But I wonder, and I'm always curious about this too. What would you say one of the most difficult pieces that you had to do was, as far as challenging or like just put up a fight from the beginning? What would be?
Oh man. Well, obviously it would have to be unreleased stuff that's not being considered, but I've had a couple that aren't out yet that were really intense.
And when you say intense, what does that mean? Like, what is intense?
Well, like, obviously complexity is a factor, like just what you're being asked to paint. But there are certain things that are harder to do in oils. I work in oils, so like really, really complex magic effects that have translucency going on, that stuff can be really challenging. Crowd scenes, obviously, just super complicated things, but sometimes it's complex in the planning stages, and then you get the sketch figured out, and then it's not a big deal to actually execute it. And sometimes the planning is the easy part, and then you realize you backed yourself into a corner, and it's going to take twice as long as you thought to actually execute it to completion. But most difficult, the Planeswalkers, I would say that they're probably at the top of the list, even if the image isn't necessarily that complicated, because they just have to be so correct. Like, there's so many things to consider, like the Huatli painting I did for Ixalan, which has like her 3-headed T-Rex in the background.
Got a lot of stuff going on in it.
Yeah, it's just layer after layer after layer after layer of detail across the entire image. Plus, that outfit that Tyler designed for is completely super complicated. So
yeah, that would be a very difficult outfit to go dancing in, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're doing movement, there's, like 25 tassels blowing in the wind and all kinds of things.
I mean, that's usually how a Saturday night is for me, but
right.
So with I read in an interview that you said that if you die, that you hope that nobody discovers your drawer full of crazy reference photos. Now, number one, I have to say, like, I doubt that they're crazy. I would love to see them, because for me as a non-artist, that is sort of like the behind the scenes documentary of like what makes a painting become a painting. But
right.
Why do you think you're so reticent for them to be shared? I mean, do you think that detracts away from the final product?
No, it's nothing like that. If anything, it's just a bit of vanity, where it's like, you see pictures of Frank Frazetta posing for his Barbarians in the 60s, and he was like this super shredded athlete. And I'm like this doughy nerd who's wearing an approximation of barbarian armor. And then I have to like make up all of the crazy muscles that go on top of it.
I mean, you do not start. I mean, like, you doughy. I mean, that's
You'd be surprised.
I would be surprised. You look pretty svelte. But okay.
So much appreciated. There were also times in the past when I was much less so.
Oh yeah, no, I gotcha. I used to weigh 400 pounds myself, so you kind of got that phantom weight like hanging around where you're like, you still kind of, it feels like it's there, but it's not really there, and you kind of.
Yeah, I think it's the rare person that feels super comfortable putting, shirtless pictures of themselves on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. I mean, like it's kind of a unique niche of a person, but more power to them if they can, I guess. But,
for sure, yeah, no doubt.
So you went to an art school where you went with people like Tyler Jacobson, Jason Chan, and Darkin. You didn't really know them there.
No,
kind of found each other afterwards, but your teachers were also stars as well in their own right. Tell me about some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for the average viewer, they're probably not big household names, but if you Googled any of them, you'd find a ton of really incredible 20th century illustration, like Kazu Sano. He did a ton of really, really amazing paleo art, like dinosaur stuff, and like for Scientific American, like really big publications, National Geographic, dinosaurs, early man, evolution stuff. He also did a ton of novel covers. He had an insane career. Unfortunately, he passed away.
He was passed away in was 2015 or something, or 2011. It was.
Yeah, I was super lucky to have him. Also, I mean, I always say Stephen Player, who's an English illustrator, watercolorist originally. Now he does a lot of digital as well. Really great, amazing illustrator. Also, Chuck Pyle, who's sort of like a Norman Rockwell style Americana 20th century illustrator who, while his stuff can be like pretty nostalgic, it's just like perfectly executed. And he has like the eye where he would call out the one thing I didn't want him to notice about a painting every single time.
What would be an example of that? Like maybe like a finger that wasn't scaled or something?
Oh yeah, no, there's a specific one. It was actually on the first painting that I ever got into the Spectrum annual, but this was before I submitted it to Spectrum. It was this long sort of panorama image of this big sort of biomechanical monster. It's all kind of symbolic, and there's like a woman with a blindfold on and a big sword, and it's the prompt was just like illustrate like a moment of truth. And I totally just rushed it on painting her wrist and didn't really plan exactly how like the wrist anatomy would be working in that situation. So it doesn't look completely wrong, but it's the kind of thing where if you really know your stuff, you'll be like, he's kind of phoning it on that. And I remember him looking at it being like, looks good, Chris. John Foster would have cared a little bit more about that wrist.
Ooh, ouch.
Think about that. That still just goes through my head when I'm painting wrists sometimes.
That one's going to leave a mark for sure.
Yeah. It's one of those things where like, he knew I was passionate. I really wanted to make it. And so I think he really held my feet to the fire.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. You're not going to do that to somebody. It's like, that's not the kind of thing you're going to say to somebody. I mean, unless you're, vicious, but somebody is clearly not meant for that path. You're probably not going to give them that kind of like, good job.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to scale your criticism as a teacher to the level that the student's working at. Like,
yeah.
Otherwise, it won't be helpful,
And you also, right out of school, got found representation, which were people who had worked with your teachers as well, right?
Correct. Yeah. It was with an agency out of New York called Lingard and Smith, who represented Kazu, and I think they still represent Chuck Pyle. But signed with them, and it was one of those things where I was super excited, and it seemed like everything was really getting off to a good start. And I graduated, and then it was 6 months of silence.
And what was the breaker of that silence then after the 6 months?
Well, I had been just cranking, going through the last of my student loan money, like, okay, I'm gonna have to get a day job here. And I was just painting, making portfolio pieces, putting them online. And then it's kind of a roundabout way that this came around, because one of the sort of assistant lower level people at Lingard and Smith at the time was a Magic fan. And I didn't know him. We became friends later after he left, and we were both living in Portland at the time. But this guy, Johnny Accurso, I always throw his name out there because like we're still buddies to this day when we get a chance to catch up. But he didn't even ask the agents. He just cold sent my portfolio to Jeremy Jarvis, who at the time was the main art director at Magic. And yeah, I just got an email. It's like, hey, would you be interested?
And did you at that time, Magic was the superstar that it is. Was that like one of those moments where you were just like, pinch me?
Yeah, it was a big deal for me. Like I'd been pursuing illustration and obviously doing fantasy stuff as well as science fiction, horror, all that stuff that I've always loved. But I actually played Magic in middle school. So this was like not something I'd been chasing in particular. Like I was thinking more like book covers, like what Donato was doing at the time and Brahm. But it was more that I just wasn't really familiar with how the Magic thing worked. But obviously I was super enthusiastic because it was something I was familiar with. And, I collected the cards as a kid because I love the art so much and kind of played on the side.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I saw online that you traded some of your pieces early on for other pieces of Magic art. Yeah. Sorry. Back when the originals market was a lot slower than it is today, I used to just run into other Magic artists at conventions, and we'd have paintings that had been sitting around for years that we'd been, had for sale for quite a while, and nobody picked up. When they were just we were selling them in the hundreds of dollars. Oh my God, that's hard to hear. It's like, ouch.
Stories for you, man. I think I sold Blightsteel Colossus for $700.
Oh my God.
Something like that.
I
know it's changed hands for 10 times that, but
yeah, and today it would go for what, $100,000? I mean, honest to goodness.
I have no idea.
That's my guess.
It's one of those things where I don't hold it against the buyers reselling. It's their thing. They can do whatever they want. It's just like I feel super lucky that I've been able to also take advantage of the more sort of active market the way it is now.
Yeah, I got you.
And those days made me appreciate these days for sure.
Right. You can feel a little bit bitter about it, I think. Okay. I mean, it's like if you just keep it private, you don't tell anybody, but be like, damn it, but I mean, that's just,
it's a good one to have in my back pocket if I ever need to compare losses, I guess.
Do you have any? Now you said that. Now, of course, you are known for painting cards that have gone on to become, like powerhouses. And you say that some of your favorite ones are the ones that were the quote unquote bad cards, i.e. they're not the popular cards, and that you still have some of those around, or at least during the time of the interview, you said you have that. Do you still have any of your originals that you kept?
Yeah, I have 5 or 10 laying around. A lot of them are earlier pieces that weren't super good cards, but they sort of felt like breakthroughs to me personally, just from like a painting standpoint. So it was part nostalgia and also like a technical thing. It's like I want to remember how I did that. And it's harder to do that with a digital image than it is when you're actually holding the painting, and you can see the strokes in 3 dimensions and everything.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, like an example would be there was one I did for Shards of Alara. It's one of the Shards of Alara sets in my first year. That was, I think it's called Sighted Cast Sorcerer.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big one for me. There's also Guiltspire Avenger.
That one.
I kept both of those.
Yeah. Now about that one, I was curious. Maybe this is my interpretation of it, but there's sadness in that Avenger's face. And to me, it looks like he's sort of not happy with the fact that he's having to do what he has to do. Am I wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted sort of. I mean, there's kind of an era of painting that I'm a little bit obsessed with called the Pre-Raphaelites, sort of the end of the 1800s, sometimes spilling into the early 1900s. It's a very romantic, sort of Renaissance-y, but with a higher level of finish. And a lot of them have that sort of twilight, somber vibe to them that has always kind of spoke to me. And yeah, there's something about the scene, as opposed to like showing the fight, where it's just like raw action. Like
Right.
something about that, like it's over, he's alone again.
Yeah.
It's like it's a hell of a job.
Yeah, and it's pretty sad when you think about it. It's like, well, if you were, you know, if you are a human being, and it's gonna leave you with some, well, there's gonna be some PTSD there going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's something people don't talk about a lot with you're dealing with the fantasy worlds that we all paint. It's like it's pretty dark, man.
Right. And mind you, you've got some dark stuff. Like it, but what's interesting about you is you seem to slip it in like pretty it's either slipped in very subtly, or the cards themselves, the framing of the cards cut things off. But some of the stuff you do, I mean, is I mean, and I don't mean it in a mean way, but like it's vicious, like the sort of level of horror you go to, such as like.
I mean, I've also asked to do that sometimes. You know?
Yes. Now I was wondering, so you must be a horror buff. You have to have been a horror buff.
Yeah. Like I grew up on, you know, Alien and Predator and all the like good old 80s sci-fi fantasy action horror stuff that you know, I mean, I was born in 84, so it's kind of it was right in there. I had an older brother who was into all that stuff too, so I would wind up seeing things like way too young.
Oh no, what was one of the early transgressions for you that like left?
Predator was pretty rough. I think I was like 5 when I saw that one time.
Yikes.
For the first time. Yeah, it was he didn't care.
Yeah,
he was like 8, you know, it's not like he should have been responsible.
How did you guys get a copy of the Predator? I mean, because
my parents weren't super worried about it.
They were like,
they're good people, but it's like they'll like we were given a fair amount of independence. I'll put it that way.
Oh man, yeah, no, I was not allowed to see my first R-rated film until I was 13. Like it was no.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that damage helps kind of drive me toward this career, though.
I think it helps because you look at, say, like the Runewald Abomination, and you can't help but or Unmake that one, which is not.
I kept that one too.
That one is freaking terrifying. I mean, was there a prompt for that? Were those cards like? Because I'm going through those cards. It seems like as a whole, they are much like more vicious and mean-spirited and horror like focused than say a regular Magic set. Is that the tone that they give you guys, or is that just a happy coincidence?
I mean, there is discussion. Like when we're starting in on a new world, there's sort of like some prompts that we get, like general prompts about like, I mean, obviously Innistrad is Gothic horror. So like something like Ulvenwald Abomination, like you can go a little bit freakier than you would in like, say,
like Theros or
Theros. I was thinking about
Ravnica.
I totally dropped it. The Indian filigree inspired one.
Oh, Kaladesh.
Kaladesh. That's what.
Oh yeah, no violence on Kaladesh. I don't think they allow that. You can only like
the gold polished really clean.
Right. You can only aether to death. You can't bleed.
Exactly. Yeah, that was actually my first concept push was Kaladesh.
And that's something I do want to get into with you. But for instance, like with Unmake, or even some of your personal pieces, like the summoning, there is this horror. You can tell there's a horror lover in there. What was the story behind the summoning? Because I am fascinated by your pieces that you do when you're not being assigned, because they definitely have a horror theme to most
Sure.
of them. And what inspires a piece like that? Is that comes in a dream, or is it?
I guess I sort of like this space between like some of my other personal work, like some of the little like portraits I've done and stuff are kind of in sort of a Baroque portraiture space, where like I like combining sort of like pretty classical looking things that would almost feel like they'd fit in a museum with something like odd and creepy. So it goes from that to like, I'm also kind of a big history nerd. So something like The Summoning, it was, like I find like Neolithic and a lot of archaeological discoveries really interesting. So thinking about like, if there were, like what was going on, say like in The Summoning, that scene looks pretty sort of like Neolithic European. But like, what if all those stones and sacrificial altars and stuff, like what if they actually were summoning something? And it was also just like mixing something really kind of pretty and evocative with something kind of horrific at the same time, like the scene with the dragon in the background and sort of the scene of exaltation with the horror that kind of bought it from the universe down below. Like those relationships, I guess, are interesting to me.
And your dragons, like I don't know if you know this, but Todd Lockwood actually said in an interview about you, he said, Chris Rahn is one that stands out for me. I love everything he does. I'll look at one of his pieces, I'll stare at it, and I'll think to myself, there's absolutely nothing I'd change about that. That must be.
I had not heard that.
Yes. And I think that if we were talking about somebody who would be like sort of an heir to his dragon like legacy, I think you fall into that category, because your dragons are so, I mean, they're so fiercely individual, they're terrifying. And like for instance, what was it, the demanding dragon that one's brutal. That one's brutal.
That was part of the art description, having it carrying that horse.
See, now, I don't understand. I mean, that's confusing to me, because it's like when I was talking to Chris Seaman, like when he did the Meat Hook Massacre, they sort of were like, at the end they were like, they tapered down the massacre. But to me, seeing a poor little dead horse just like,
yeah, well, that's the weird thing about doing this kind of art for a living, is like where people's lines are is pretty surprising to me sometimes. Like I feel the same way. Like to me, the horrors in the storytelling, like gore for its own sake, isn't necessarily scary.
Yeah.
But a lot of people see that and sort of at face value and find it problematic. So yeah, like sometimes I'm kind of shocked with what I can get away with, to be honest. But I submit very clear sketches beforehand, so like they know what they're getting.
So like with the Uvenwald abomination, the dead horse was there when you submitted.
Well, it really varies. Like for the demanding dragon, I basically painted literally what they asked for, but obviously I designed the shot and everything in the dragon. But it really varies piece by piece. Like I think the Ulvenwald abomination, they mentioned, okay, so the werewolves become this monstrous abomination compared to what is on the other side of the card. Maybe it's, standing on a wrecked carriage or something. And there was no mention of the horse, but what pulls a carriage? Horses. Yeah. I'm like, okay. So I'm in all the design phase of it. I'm like, okay, what would make sense for the horse's placement? Have the horses run off, or are they dead? Maybe one ran off and one got killed. And yeah, it just kind of evolves. And then I do remember sending that sketch in and being like, I hope they're cool with this. But also, I like the art director and I both know in that case it's going to be behind the text box anyway, so it's really not that big of a deal.
Do you ever do that? I mean, is that something that happens on purpose when you know that the text box is covering something, so you add in
that was more like a happy accident, I guess. Like generally speaking, like it's kind of bad form to like sneak things in, and especially if the art director's not if the art director isn't cued into something, that's really like a big no-no. Like you definitely, if there's going to be something, they have to know about it before they go
Right,
final. Just from like a responsibility standpoint, like they don't want to be on the hook for something they didn't know about.
Right. What I'm curious about though is I've never really seen anybody mention this, like at least at length. But when you got the assignment to do Black Lotus, I mean, of course, you knew what it was. You didn't know what Time Walk was, which is pretty cool. But you said that the version that you submitted was much different from what the assignment that they, or at least the ideas they came to you with. Now, what made you like decide to go in that direction? Were they sort of like, we're open to you bringing whatever you want to the table, but here's what we were thinking? How does that go down?
Yeah, that's an example of something I get a lot, and I think I probably get it more in the place that I'm in than earlier, like newer artists. But like after you've worked on a game for 10 or 15 years, they sort of know they can trust you with more freedom. So I even at that point, I'd been on Magic for 5 years or something, and I think they trusted me quite
Which
a bit.
is pretty impressive. I mean, like 5 years is, I mean, it's certainly not like, I mean, it's a great accomplishment, but it's not necessarily maybe one that people would think, oh, this is somebody who we would give carte blanche to, but your work spoke for itself.
Right. And obviously, like, what I'm saying is basically at that point, sometimes, and I get it more now, they would say, maybe this is the scene, but it's, open to interpretation if you have a better idea, like that kind of thing. So like, I figured I have an idea, I'll take a swing with a sketch of my idea, and if they say no, I'll do what they initially suggested. But even then it was like maybe this, but if you have something cooler, go for it. Because the art directors are like, ideally you're not just sort of a conduit for their idea. Like it's kind of like we're hiring you because you're an expert at what you do. So it'd be weird to tell your electrician how to do electrician stuff,
I mean, I do that all the time, but then that's why I keep burning down my house. So
right.
But that's interesting. And it's kind of, what's really cool about that is that your design for the Black Lotus ended up making its way onto Arena as a
Yeah, it's been super cool. And I was super happy at its reception, partially because it was my idea, but also just like, I mean, I've known what the Black Lotus is since I was like 10, like it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So being asked to like make the new one, I was excited, and then I was immediately like, oh man, if I screw this up, I'm never going to live it down. So
I'm curious, what was the original push that they had brought to you that you opted to?
From what I remember, granted, this was literally 10 years ago, but I believe they suggested maybe having it growing out of some like ruins in the foreground, and then in the background you see the city burning that the ruins are a part of, where it kind of makes sense, like it's growing out of destruction, sort of like the cycle
Right.
of life and death and all that stuff. But I while that's a cool and very epic scene, the first thing that popped into my head was more of like, it's basically the same story of death and life and whatever, but it's more sort of intimate. Yeah, that was the thinking. And also the sort of the blasted out background being sort of like a subconscious thing of like it's leaching the literal color out of the scene around it, but it's also an effective tool as an illustrator to make the colors pop out more, like to pull all the color out of the background so that they're extra vibrant.
That's crafty. Well, yep, you're good at what you do, that's for sure. So, and then Black Lotus 2 was really the like, it seems like it was the forerunner for you sort of taking it into your own hands and auctioning your artwork online, if I'm not
mistaken. It really was. And it wasn't this stroke of genius necessarily. I mean, in retrospect, it wound up being a good idea, but when the art was finally shown, like at that point especially, I had no idea when my art was going to be released. So it was a completely random morning. I'm drinking my coffee and I checked my email, and there were literally 40 emails of people asking about the original painting. And I was in my 20s, like I'd sold a few paintings, but it wasn't my main thing at all. I was mostly just working in oils because I prefer to. But there was so much interest. I literally didn't know like who to offer it to or what it would be worth with that much interest. Like I didn't know how to price it. So I was like, maybe if I stick it on eBay, that they can figure out what it's worth for me by bidding. Like it was just sort of an act of desperation because I didn't know what to do. But it wound up paying off, and then from there a lot more people started first doing eBay, and then now we have like Facebook groups like the MTG Art Market.
Right. And I really think that you probably were the forerunner for that that sort of like wave of the analog artists being highly sought after. I mean, it seems like that was where.
I mean, I hope so. Though it would be very cool to have had that kind of impact. But if I was, it's certainly. I mean, I always try to be supportive of my fellow artists, but it was all just trying to make the best decision at the time. You know? Well,
I mean, whether it's a happy accident or it was a shrewd business move, I think all of your fellow artists are very thankful for you.
Things have definitely improved since then in the originals market.
That's Tiamat went for how much was it? 65,000 was it?
Which one?
Tiamat went for 65,000, was it?
Yeah. Tiamat was 65. That's close to my record. The record one was actually the D&D cover that I just had come out.
Wait, what did that go for?
70.
Oh my goodness. You know, that's gotta be, I mean, like, do you just like, when that happens, when you get that note that says it sold for this, do you shit yourself right there, or do you just sort of like wait a little bit and try to make it the best?
It's just so bizarre. Like I still, the whole thing is kind of like like I feel like I'm having an out-of-body experience when I talk about it, because like I did not come from any kind of means or anything like that, and just the way things have gone, I've been super duper lucky, and I'm very thankful that there are people that are that interested in original magic art. It's just so wild to me. But yeah, and no, it's just super surreal. But also like there were years there when I was like, some of my friends like Kieran Yanner and Tyler Jacobson that are very accomplished oil painters that were doing most of their work digitally. I had been just trying to get them in on it. Like when the market really picked up, like I spent years working on Tyler, and then now he's the one that holds the record.
That's wow. Like talk about like he must be very, very like very thankful for you to talk. And again, that's also something you did as well. Like you called it. I listened to an interview with you a few years earlier. You called it before it happened, but like after the wave of digital came out and everybody sort of got used to like the new like fangled thing that could do, there was more of a return to the original, painting because of the secondary market as well. I mean, I talk to more new magic artists now who are very conscious of that, and I think that was something else that you were ahead of the curve on.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, it felt like I was making the worst possible business decision because, oil painting takes longer. You have to do photography to digitize it and then color correct it and all this stuff. And it felt like I was just stuck in the mud compared to all these digital folks back in the 2000s that were just banging out finals. But I was doing it just because I literally prefer oil painting and was hoping someday maybe it would pay off, but who knows. But it's kind of a supply and demand thing too, where like back when everybody was traditional, I mean, of course the Magic fan base was much smaller, and there's a lot of other factors as well, but around 2010, 2012, when people started getting more interested in originals, it was down to like maybe 10 or 15 magic artists that were still working traditionally out of 100 or however many there were at the time.
That's insane.
It was like 10% maybe, and now it's kind of going the other way a little bit.
I think so. I mean, I'd say it has to be, at least everybody I've talked to, even the people who've just started in as digital, and we're talking like maybe people who are in it for the first time ever, right. They come in digital and they're like, oh, this is the thing? I got to go back and
yeah. And nowadays, I feel like, I mean, it was hard for me to get a good education in oil painting. Like I had to take fine art classes when I was in the illustration department. I had to convince teachers to let me work in oils when they were primarily focused on teaching something else. Like it was just my medium that like worked like how my brain works. So I was just kind of pushing against the tide for a long time back when I was learning how to do it and everything. But now it's, I mean, I feel for kids that are getting educations now, because I feel like all the hot, cool stuff that you see online is basically concept art for film and video games and that kind of stuff, which is amazing. Like I'm a huge fan of it, but there's also markets for traditional paintings, and you know, there's this whole other thing that I feel like sort of gets ignored.
Yeah, as you were in concept art, I would imagine it's more important to get good at the painting aspect of it, because you can always build off of that with the concept art, whereas there's much more nuance in the paintings, correct?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, what people call concept art now, like it's supposed to be loose work where you just bang out ideas really fast, but a lot of what people see that's quote unquote concept art are like these hyper detailed digital splash images that actually took somebody like a week to do. It's almost like a matte painting or something. So, I mean, there are some that are, you know, there's tons of finesse, tons of detail, everything in between. Like if you see the concept art that I post from Concept Pushes, like it's rough because
is that rough?
Like it's actual concept art. Like you have to bang it out. Like you'll see. I mean, I'm posting some right now on my Instagram. Like it's just like locking in ideas, and it's not like super rough, but compared to like a final piece, it is. But I think a lot of people, when they think of concept art, they don't actually think of what actual concept art looks like most of the time.
I mean, I for me, your work's very thorough, like through and through. And that's also, again, one of the reasons why you fascinate me is the knowledge that you knew that you not only were going to paint on bigger canvases, but you were going to focus on detail way more than maybe you even had to, because you knew that they were going to be buying. As far as details go, is there anything that you've done throughout your career in like, say, the Magic cards that people haven't noticed that you wanted to notice, or things that you snuck in that were really kind of...
Nothing really comes to mind. I don't work too much in terms of like real Easter eggs, that kind of stuff. It's more just like I try to do my research, like say for like the Kami of Industry piece, which I did for Kamigawa, like I actually dug into like, how does Japanese blacksmithing actually work? Like traditional Japanese blacksmithing, like what do their anvils look like? They don't look like European anvils. Like what are their quenching pools shaped like? What kind of tongs do they use? What are their hammers like? That kind of thing. So it's not so much something that's hidden, but just like, when I can, I try to think through things as much as possible when I have time to. You know, we're also chasing deadlines just like everybody else. But
I mean, you do a lot of real. I mean, some of the stuff is just so. I mean, it's so clever in the sense that, like, for example, Llanowar elves, because I play it on Arena and I don't really play. I've never played green. I was traumatized very early on by a green deck, so I never played green in person, but play it on Arena. And what's fun about it is that you don't notice that there are other Llanowar elves that are there until you can, like, you stare at it and they sort of just appear out of nowhere, and that imitates what that card does as far as gameplay. Like that kind of detail is what I think is unique to your style.
Thanks. Yeah. I kind of had that in mind when I designed it. I also just wanted the sense of them just emerging from the forest as if they're a part of it. But that, I think that also just kind of speaks to my goals in general. Like, obviously, no artist is happy with the majority of their work, but I feel like when I'm pleased with a final, it's because there's a certain kind of moodiness that communicates the feeling I want people to feel when they see it. Like, I don't always get there, but that's usually what I'm striving for. I think that piece is a pretty good example of it.
And we have to talk about the one behind me. I love this. I know that you've told the story before, but I'd like to have it just on record because it's very sweet. And I don't know if I think it bears retelling, but Charmed
Sure.
Stray has a background to it.
Yeah, so this was an interesting one. I had Willow, she'll be on the viewer's left, this gray cat, who I actually adopted with my ex when we were in art school, I think freshman year of art school in California. And she was like a year old when we got her. Just a super cool cat. And she'd always been around. We had her for the whole time we were together, my ex, Beth and I, and then she was with me through a divorce. And then I think she was 18 when she finally passed away, and it was a big bummer. Like
Brutal, yeah.
She's the one sort of constant in my life through a lot of development and change, basically going from being a teenager to being, in my 30s.
It is not easy.
Yeah, it was super duper rough, and I made a post about it on Instagram. And then when the next round of assignments came through, we were working on Ravnica and or War of the Spark, whichever incarnation of Ravnica this is. But I got an email from Dawn Murin, one of the art directors, and she also has cats, and she's a big animal person like I am. So she was like, listen, Chris, let me know if this is too early or if you're not interested in doing it, but I have the perfect assignment to pay tribute to Willow. And obviously I jumped at it because I thought it'd be a pretty awesome thing to do. And I believe the photo I used for reference is actually the photo that I put on Instagram that Dawn saw.
Yes, I actually will be showing it right now as we speak, and it's
cool.
Spot on.
Yeah,
it's spot on.
It was super fun. And actually the cat on the other side of you is Dawn's cat that
really?
I snuck in without telling her. And I submitted the final, and she was pleasantly surprised. She still has that cat. She posts about it online.
That's funny because it's like earlier you're like, I don't tend to sneak things in, but then you're like, I'll sneak things in.
Well, only like something like that where I snuck it into the sketch, and Dawn actually, sorry, let me see if I can silence this thing real quick. But yeah, I just sort of wanted to give back to Dawn a little bit, and she saw him in the sketch, so I put him there so he wouldn't be a surprise in the final. He was actually a surprise where they could still kill it if she wanted to, but she was up for it. And actually Titus Lunter's cat is out of the frame as well, but I snuck him in as well.
You were a fan of Ninja Turtles growing up. Okay. Who was your favorite Ninja Turtle and who was your least favorite?
Oh man. I think as a kid, it was Donatello followed by Leonardo, probably just because I knew I was a nerd deep down, even before we were thinking about stuff like that.
I think mine changed. I think I loved Leonardo as when I was young, but as I've gotten older, I think I have more in common with Raphael.
Yeah. I think I'm the same way with Raph, but I mean at the time when I was 5, it was more just about whose weapons are cool, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Raphael didn't really have the what do they call this?
Size, I think.
Yeah, the 3-pronged thing. You need a good beating stick. Was Leonardo had the beating stick? Sorry.
No, he had the katanas. Donatello had the stick.
I mean, and I was obsessed with Super Shredder in the movie. I loved the notion that I imagine you must have drawn him too. It's probably.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I was drawing all the Ninja Turtles, all the various mutants. Also, that kind of got me on a kick for a couple of years. Sorry. Still going off.
It's okay. I think my guys have given up the ghost.
Okay, cool. But yeah, I remember this is a thing that I've related to people in the past too, about how I kind of feel like I wasn't born to be a fine artist. I was born specifically to be an illustrator, because I remember being 6 or 7 years old and asking my mom for assignments that were basically okay, Mom, give me 2 different animals to combine with a person, because I want to make up my own unique mutants, Ninja Turtle style. but I was like asking for assignments the way that an illustrator would. And in retrospect, it's like, oh yeah, no, it's a very specific thing that my brain was geared to.
Now, what separates a fine artist from an illustrator? Because the way that it seems like it's sometimes discussed in some of the more like, snobby circles, that they tend to poo-poo illustration, and fine art is sort of the aspirational thing. Is that, am I wrong in that view of it? But what makes the difference? I feel like they all really are kind of the same thing.
Well, I mean, I did see some of that when I was in art school, but I personally haven't dealt with too much sort of snobbery as an adult, but or as a professional, I should say. But when I say it, I just mean like a modern fine artist basically paints a bunch of paintings that they conceive start to finish, and then they have a show. So they're kind of acting as their own art director in a way, and then they sell the paintings. Whereas an illustrator is hired to paint a thing that is someone else's idea, basically. Like there are a lot of people that do both, myself included sometimes. It's been a while since I've done it, but it's a blurry line. And some people, I mean, like Adam Paquette comes to mind. He's very deep in fine art and in illustration.
But there's none of that, but I've interviewed him, but he doesn't have any of that sort of like that cliquishness that I've seen. Like, well, just the only reason I say this is I won't say which interview I was reading, but you mentioned that some of your the favorite paintings that inspired you, and one of them was Odd Nerdrum, who I personally thought was awesome. Like and the fact that he the fact David Bowie bought one of his paintings, and it's the one that inspired the footage from that movie The Cell, where he's just this really cool guy. And I'm reading this article, and they're like, it surprised me that Chris liked him, because I thought he was a hack. And I'm like, well, that's an interesting take on it. I don't know if hacks really I mean, sort of, if that's a hack, then
Yeah, I mean, art is subjective at the end of the day. Like there are a lot of people out there that would much rather have like a Mondrian print on their wall that's just blocks of color than something more classical. Like that's not my preference, but at the end of the day, I'm never going to judge somebody for whatever makes them happy.
Well, I would.
Sure. But I mean, maybe with a couple beers in me, but in general, I try not to think that way. It's just whatever sort of evokes a feeling in you. Like I try to paint in a way that people that I respect, because their work has invoked feelings in me, like I'm sort of trying to not emulate them, but like that's the sort of line of thinking that I want to be.
There's a bloodline like sort of that happens where you
and I've always reacted to classical paintings, but particularly like sort of Rembrandt-y stuff that has a lot of, like, there are loose areas and there are really tight areas, and there's texture, and they're both realistic and painterly at the same time. It's not like hyper realism where you can see all the pores on their face, but and there's also, like with Rembrandt and with Odd Nerdrum, who's definitely, at least in my book, sort of in line with Rembrandt's painting style. There's sort of like an exaggerated lighting effect that he does, where like the reflected light is kind of exaggerated, so you get these like blooms of light and the reflected light into eye sockets and shadows and stuff that just has this kind of dreamlike, otherworldly effect.
I mean, whether people would want to admit it or not, like he basically inspired 1990s music videos. Like if there was any music video in the 1990s that had any sort of like eeriness to it, you could probably go back to his work and his lighting and his setup, and it was definitely influencing people.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of people like that. And things get like picked up and set down and like rediscovered. But yeah, I mean, it's just a few examples. There's also a lot of old school illustrators that I looked to as well, and did, especially when I was in school, like N.C. Wyeth and that whole Brandywine school. And they, him and Dean Cornwell, they were illustrating books like Treasure Island and Robin Hood and stuff like that. Very sort of classic stuff. But if you look at those paintings, they're just so effective. And like any one of those paintings would work on a Magic card because they're bold and have very clear silhouettes and communicate what they need to very, very clearly. And their sense of design is just insane.
It's amazing to hear the synchronicity with people, with all of you Magic artists and the people that you look up to, because it solidifies that there are certain certain artists that you cannot argue they were their generation's brilliance. These are history books in the making.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, there are illustrators from, like I took an illustration history class specifically in college on top of all the regular art history stuff. And it was like, there's a ton of stuff that didn't speak to me, but the stuff that does, I think is probably, I would have in common with other people that wound up doing the type of illustration that I do, just because it's like a similar road. But yeah, I don't know. I find all that stuff really interesting, whether in any era. I mean, even going back to like the Renaissance, like people talk about the old masters like Da Vinci and Michelangelo and those guys as if they were fine artists, but they weren't. They were really illustrators that were being hired by the Catholic Church to paint biblical scenes.
It's ironic that these people who are held to these the great heights are actually, like you said, they are illustrators. They were commissioned by. They did love.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, they are a company, but they have produced so much art. Like,
yes, and
it's unbelievable.
I mean, they have and provided all of people provided not just jobs but also the ability for art to be seen. I mean, like I cannot think of outside of like games that there's a place where you can see artists do their thing the way that Magic does.
Yeah. I mean, especially in terms of visibility, like that's another discussion. Is like if you look at book covers now, there are not that many painted book covers. There were 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but like it's all sort of trend based.
It's so shitty.
Agreed.
Book covers are so bland. They're just like sort of like they look like they're designed on templates.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them are, and they're probably cheaper to produce for that. But it's also just trends in publishing. But there's also just this greater trend. Like if you look at catalogs or advertisements from 50, 60 years ago, it's all illustrations because it was cheaper than hiring a photographer and a model and all this stuff. But there was all this really cool advertising illustration that used to be a thing.
Yeah.
Totally gone. Book cover illustration comes and goes. But what's interesting about what we do, I think, is like it's kind of the last bastion of illustration because it's stuff that you can't photograph. Right. At the end of the day, like every single one of these scenes is something you can't photograph. You have to either sculpt it digitally or paint it digitally or sketch it, doing perspective with a pencil and a ruler, like or when it comes to creatures, like even if it's painting a person, something that you could technically photograph, like their costume is going to be incredibly specific and complicated. Like it's funny that we wound up with this sort of safe harbor of for illustrators because you have to be able to make something out of nothing to do this kind of art.
Yeah, that's a good point. That makes a lot of sense because if it were hyperrealism, you would just hire a photographer. It would be more cost effective.
Yeah, and that's something that people don't realize about hyperrealism when you see those paintings and drawings on Instagram where you can see the highlights on the little sweat blobs on their face. Like they're drawing a photo. They took a photo and they're drawing it like pixel for pixel. Like it's cool, but it's not the same thing as making something up.
No, it's not. It certainly isn't. And I mean, like, and again, it's not a matter of like, I'm not poo-pooing anybody, but there just is, to me, you don't get that magic kind of thing that when you look at a painting, when you see a painting in real life, and it's, like a work, a masterwork, and you get to see the brushstrokes and the way the light flickers off the lacquer, and the fact that a human being was the reason this thing is. If there was a painting and money was not an option, and you could pick the really exorbitant one, which one would it be?
Oh man, that's a hell of a question. I actually came really close to buying this piece from Donato a couple of years ago. That it was like in the middle of the pandemic, so I was being a little bit like cautious because I didn't know where things were going to be going financially. But it was this Lord of the Rings painting of it's an orc like stepping on Frodo, and Frodo's on the ground, and the orc has a whip in its hand, and it's kind of this like awkward down shot. It's a huge painting. It's like 4 or 5 feet. And me and Donato are on opposite sides of the country. It would have been a nightmare to get over here. I regret not getting it because it wound up selling. So like I was just like reminded of it, and I was talking to him about it, and I just kind of like hesitated, thinking like, oh, maybe I'll pick it up later, because he'd had it for like 5 or 10 years. I thought it was safe, but it was just one of those things where like, of course, somebody snaps it up right because I hesitated.
That sucks. I hate when that happens. It seems like you're like, damn you, fates. Well, don't worry. I won't be keeping you for much longer. This next question is a Patreon question, and this is somebody who is very much in love with I think it's the dragon hatchling. It's a little white dragon, a baby dragon. I can't believe it.
Oh, right.
He wants to know how it came to be. He's very upset. Was it how did it come to be? Was it digital at first? Are there sketches? Is it difficult to get the hands right? And he basically wants to know everything about it. He's in love with it, and he also wants to know, is it sold?
Yeah, it was actually painted for this project that I think Irene Gallo was in charge of. This was like 12 years ago, so it's a long time ago. She's the art director at Tor. It was called Microvisions, and I want to say it was for charity. But it was so long ago, it's super fuzzy. But yeah, I just remember that I was stoked to be asked to do it, because a lot of like cool artists were doing Microvisions at the time, and I was a nobody basically. And yeah, it was like 5 by 7 inches, and so like the original is really, really small. And so it wound up just being like a fun sort of experimental piece, because there wasn't any art direction. It's like something that would hopefully raise some money.
And did it get sold for charity, you said?
I believe so, yeah. It was one of those things where they did everything. Like I basically painted it, let it dry, put it in a box, and shipped it to them.
Well, so. I know that if there is a sketch of it lying around, like this person is ravenous for it. Ravenous. They like.
Unfortunately, I don't believe there is. I've moved about 5 times since I painted that. And if it's, I think that sketch was on tracing paper, and it's probably turned to dust by now.
Oh, he's going to be so crestfallen, but
Sorry, man.
It's okay. It's okay. And then the final one that I like to ask, a little bit of a goofy question, but I like to know, what song is it that you love that is so embarrassing to admit that you love? And I mean, we're talking like, you put it on, it's shame-based. You like, what's a guilty pleasure? And it's got to be bad. Don't say anything like that, has actual musicians in it or something like that. We need something bad. Like,
oh man. Well, I guess this is more like just a band, but this goes back to me growing up with an older brother that eventually became a professional musician.
Oh, that's right. He's a drummer, right?
Yeah, he's a lot of things, but he's primarily a drummer. He actually has a YouTube channel called Sounds Like a Drum that's pretty popular if anybody's interested in drumming. He does demonstration stuff on there.
Awesome.
But at at a very early age, he was obsessed with Def Leppard.
Oh yeah,
like, at their height, this is like the late 80s. So anytime I hear Def Leppard, like it's not like I throw it on Spotify all the time or anything like that, but like it has like a warm place in my heart because it's like a throwback to my childhood.
And we'll be. I mean, it would be great to see you in the getup. I mean, get yourself. I mean, I saw a photo of you with the long wig and the long blonde wig on, and just get yourself some spandex and some mascara, and you're good to go.
I think I'd be too old. Those guys were in their 20s at the time.
They were too old to do that ever. I mean, and plus, I think they still try to dress like that from time to time. So,
it's true. It's true. We'll have to get some leopard print spandex going.
I mean, I know I try to keep someone handy at all times.
Nice.
For parties and
for sure.
And weddings, of course. Well, before I let you go, I wanted to know. I mean, obviously there are Magic cards that are going to be in the works. I mean, I'm assuming that you are working on stuff that you cannot discuss specifics, but there are going to be things coming out later.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I have like somewhere around 20 unreleased Magic images right now.
Is there anything else that you're working on that you are wanting to promote that is something that is non-Magic related?
I've been super focused on Magic the last few years. There's some stuff I've been meaning to do, like personal work wise and stuff, but in general, I'm just stoked with what I'm working on. I occasionally do something for D&D, so keep an eye out for that as well. But yeah, it's these days it's pretty much all Magic all the time around here.
How did you like that chat with Chris? Let us know in the comments.
And for those of you who want to hear even more from Chris's interview, here comes today's Patreon plug.
And if you are the next person to join, remember there is a free Virus of Negation waiting for you, no matter what tier you choose.
That felt forced.
Yeah, that did feel a bit shoehorned.
And undignified.
I agree.
But plugs are a necessary evil. And nobody looks dignified when they're plugging themselves on camera.
You can say that again.
And nobody looks dignified when they're plugging themselves on camera.
Have a dignified evening.
Bye-bye.